We always like to think we have a sixth sense, a gut feeling that warns us when danger is near. But the terrifying truth about the internet is that it numbs that instinct. We get so used to the convenience of scrolling, clicking, and buying that we forget that behind every profile picture there is a real person. And sometimes that person has intentions that go far beyond a simple transaction. I've bought dozens of things online without issue, but after what happened in the winter of 2018, I haven't opened a marketplace app since. And if you listen to this story, you probably won't either. My name is Liam, and at the time I was a 23-year-old freelance photographer living in a cramped apartment in downtown Seattle. I was trying to upgrade my gear but was working on a shoestring budget. If you know anything about photography, you know that camera bodies are expensive, so I spent most of my nights refreshing Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, hunting for a steal. It was a Tuesday, around 11:45 p.m. when I saw it. A listing had just been posted 3 minutes prior. A Canon EOS R5, a camera that usually retails for nearly $4 grand, listed for $1,200. The description was brief, almost lazy. Ex-wife's camera, don't know how to use it, just want it gone. Cash only, first come, first serve. My heart literally skipped a beat. This was the kind of deal you hear about but never find. I messaged the seller immediately. His profile name was Arthur Vance, and his photo was a blurry shot of an older man in a fishing hat. He replied almost instantly. "It's yours if you can come tonight. I'm moving to Florida tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Need the cash for the drive." The urgency was a red flag. I know that now, but in the moment my brain rationalized it. He was an older guy, going through a divorce, moving states. It made sense. I didn't want to lose the deal, so I told him I was on my way. The address he sent wasn't in the city. It was in a place called Ravendale, a rural area about 45 minutes southeast, deep in the woods of King County. I wasn't stupid enough to go alone, especially with $1,200 in cash in my pocket. I woke up my roommate, Chris. Chris was a big guy, played rugby in college, the kind of person you want next to you in a sketch situation. He grumbled, but when I promised him $50 and a late-night diner run afterwards, he threw on his hoodie. We hopped into my 2008 Honda Civic and hit the road. It was raining, that constant, miserable Pacific Northwest drizzle that makes the asphalt shine like black glass. As we left the city lights behind, the roads got darker and narrower. The GPS on my phone was glowing, the blue line snake winding into the middle of nowhere. "You sure about this, man?" Chris asked, turning down the radio. "This seems pretty far out for a quick sale." "It's a $3,000 camera for $1,200, I said, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "For that price, I'd drive to Alaska." We turned off the main highway onto a road called Cedar Hollow Lane. The street lights vanished completely here. The only illumination came from my headlights cutting through the mist and the towering Douglas fir trees that crowded the road on both sides. It felt claustrophobic, like the forest was closing in on us. The GPS voice announced, "You have arrived." But there was nothing there, just a rusted mailbox at the end of a long gravel driveway that disappeared into the darkness. I checked the time. 12:52 a.m. I pulled into the driveway. The gravel crunched loudly under my tires, a sound that seemed aggressively loud in the silence of the woods. About 200 yards in, the headlights swept over a structure. It wasn't really a house. It looked more like a converted workshop or a small warehouse, with corrugated metal siding and a single dim yellow light bulb buzzing above a large rolling garage door. "Sketchy," Chris muttered, sitting up straighter. I put the car in park, but kept the engine running. I texted Arthur. "I'm here." 3 dots appeared, then, "Come to the side door of the garage. It's open. I'm packing the truck out back." I looked at Chris. "You stay in the car. Keep it running. If anything looks weird, honk." "No way," Chris said, unbuckling. I'm not letting you walk in there alone with a wad of cash. I'm coming." We both got out. The air was freezing and smelled of wet pine and something else, something metallic like copper. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. There were no crickets, no wind, just the hum of my idling car. We walked toward the side door. It was slightly ajar, revealing pitch blackness inside. "Arthur?" I called out. My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the trees. No answer. I pushed the door open with my foot. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. It was a garage, but it was empty. No boxes, no moving truck, no furniture. Just a concrete floor stained with oil, and a single wooden chair sitting in the exact center of the room. On the chair sat a camera bag. "Is that it?" Chris whispered. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. I unzipped the bag. The Canon R5 was there. I picked it up. It felt heavy, real. But then I turned it over. The lens was smashed, the glass shattered inward, and the battery compartment was duct-taped shut. It was broken, completely useless. "What the hell?" I whispered. "Liam," Chris said. His voice was different, urgent. "Look at the floor." I lowered my flashlight beam. I had missed it at first because of the oil stains, but looking closer, under the harsh LED light of my phone, I saw scratches. Deep, white gouges in the concrete, leading from the chair toward the back wall, like someone or something heavy had been dragged. And then we heard it. Click. It was a sound from the dark corner of the garage, behind a stack of old tires. It sounded exactly like the safety being clicked off a firearm. Then, a voice. Not the voice of an older man moving to Florida. A voice that was low, raspy, and mocking. "Close the door, Liam." I froze. My blood turned to ice. He knew my name. "Run!" Chris yelled. Chris didn't wait. He grabbed my jacket and yanked me backward. At the exact same moment, a floodlight blinded us from the rafters, and the heavy metal door we had just entered through slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were trapped inside. Panic, pure and primal, took over. "The garage door!" I screamed, pointing to the main rolling door at the front. We sprinted toward it. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, boots slamming on concrete, closing the distance. I didn't look back. I grabbed the manual release chain of the rolling door and pulled with every ounce of adrenaline I had. It rattled, stuck for a terrifying second, and then shot up about 3 feet. "Go! Go!" Chris shoved me under. I scrambled underneath, scraping my back on the metal lip. I rolled onto the wet gravel outside. Chris dived after me. As Chris scrambled to his feet, a hand shot out from under the gap in the door and grabbed his ankle. It was a hand wearing a thick black leather glove. Chris screamed, kicking wildly. "Get off! Get off!" I grabbed Chris's hoodie and pulled. The assailant had a terrifying grip. I saw a flash of metal, a knife blade slicing through the air, missing Chris's calf by an inch. Chris managed to stomp his other foot down hard on the gloved hand. We heard a sickening crunch of fingers, and the grip released. We scrambled to the car. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jamming the gear stick into reverse. Chris barely got the passenger door closed before I floored it. The tires spun in the loose gravel, flinging stones everywhere before catching traction. We shot backward down the driveway. In the headlights, I saw the garage door fully rise. Standing there wasn't an old man. It was 3 men. They were wearing black tactical gear and ski masks. One of them was holding a shotgun. Boom! The windshield of my Civic shattered. Spider webs of glass exploded inward. I screamed, ducking my head, driving blindly in reverse. I swerved, the back bumper slamming into a tree, shattering the tail light. But I didn't stop. I spun the wheel, threw it into drive, and tore down Cedar Hollow Lane, doing 80 miles an hour on a road meant for 30. We didn't speak for 20 minutes. We just drove, shivering, covered in tiny shards of glass, until we hit the lights of the interstate. We went straight to the police station in King County. We gave them the address, the description, everything. They kept us there for hours. But here is the part that keeps me awake at night. The police went out to the property that same morning. They found the garage. It was empty. The chair was gone. The camera bag was gone. They ran the property records. The farmhouse had been abandoned for 5 years, foreclosed on by the bank. But they did find one thing. When they searched the woods behind the garage, they found a shallow hole that had been freshly dug. It was about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Beside it was a bag of quicklime and a shovel. The police told us that Arthur Vance was a fake profile created at a public library computer 2 days prior. The IP address led nowhere. I think about the price. $1,200. It wasn't about the money. The money was just the bait to get 2 healthy young men to drive out to a secluded location in the middle of the night. Sometimes, when I'm editing photos late at night, I hear that sound again. That sharp, mechanical click from the dark corner of the room. And I realize how close I came to being just another missing person poster on a telephone pole. Be careful what you buy online. If a deal looks too good to be true, it's not a deal. It's a trap. We often treat the windows of our homes like television screens. We look out at the world, safe behind the glass, observing the rain or the streetlights, assuming that the barrier works both ways. We assume that because we can't see anyone in the dark, no one is standing there in the shadows looking back at us. But the truth is, glass is fragile. And the moment you realize that the darkness is staring back at you, the safety of your home evaporates instantly. This is a story from my childhood that I have tried very hard to forget, but every time I smell cigarette smoke on a cold winter night, the memory comes rushing back, sharp and terrifying. My name is Mason, and this took place back in 2011, when I was 14 years old. My family lived in a 2-story colonial house in a quiet suburb of Boulder, Colorado. It was the kind of neighborhood where the driveways were long, the yards were unfenced, and the woods bordered the back of the property, separating us from the next development over. It was a Saturday in mid-December. My parents were attending a holiday party for my dad's law firm downtown. It was a formal event, so they weren't expected back until well after midnight. Being 14, I was in charge of my little brother, Toby, who was 8 at the time. To be honest, I loved nights like this. It meant I could order whatever pizza I wanted, stay up late playing Skyrim, and not have to worry about homework. The evening started out completely normal, a textbook example of a boring suburban night. We ordered a pepperoni pizza from Domino's around 6:30 p.m. We ate it on the living room floor while watching a SpongeBob marathon. By 9 p.m., Toby had passed out on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and I was deep into my video game, wearing my headset. The house was silent aside from the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clicking of my controller. Outside, it had started to snow, a heavy, wet snow that muffled all the sound from the street. Around 10:15 p.m., I took my headset off to go get a glass of water. That's when I noticed it. The smell. It was faint at first, but distinct. It wasn't the smell of a wood-burning fireplace, which was common in our neighborhood. It was sharp, chemical, and acrid. It smelled like cheap tobacco. I frowned, sniffing the air. My parents didn't smoke, and neither did any of our close neighbors. I assumed maybe a car had driven by with the window down, or perhaps the furnace was acting up. I walked into the kitchen, which faced the backyard. The smell was stronger there. The kitchen had a large bay window above the sink that looked out over the deck and the woods beyond. My mom had left the blinds pulled up to let the morning light in, but now, at night, it just turned the window into a giant black mirror. I walked over to the sink to fill my glass. As I turned the faucet on, I glanced up. Because of the kitchen light, I could mostly just see my own reflection. But then, past my reflection, I saw a tiny, rhythmic, glowing point of orange light. It flared brighter, then dimmed. It took my brain a second to process what I was seeing. It was the ember of a cigarette. Someone was standing on our back deck. My stomach dropped. The deck wasn't accessible from the street. You had to walk all the way around the side of the house, through the snow, and open a latched gate to get there. I leaned closer to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the kitchen light. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, the figure took shape. He was standing less than 3 feet away from the window. He was tall, wearing a dark, oversized parka with the hood pulled up. I couldn't see his hair, but I could see his face. The glow from the cigarette illuminated pale, gaunt skin and eyes that looked wide, too wide. He wasn't looking at the woods. He wasn't looking at the house in general. He was looking directly at me. I froze. A primal instinct, that gut feeling you hear about, screamed at me not to move. Then, he did something that made my blood run cold. He took a long drag of the cigarette, the orange light illuminating a smile that stretched unnaturally across his face. He exhaled the smoke, and it fogged up the glass between us. Then, he raised a gloved hand and tapped on the window. Tap, tap, tap. It was a playful, rhythmic sound, like he was trying to get the attention of a pet. "Nice pajamas, Mason," he mouthed. I couldn't hear him through the double-paned glass, but I read his lips perfectly. He knew my name. Panic exploded in my chest. I didn't think, I just reacted. I dropped the water glass. It shattered in the sink, a loud crash that seemed to break the spell. I spun around and sprinted into the living room. "Toby, wake up!" I screamed, shaking my brother. Toby groggily sat up. What is it?" "We have to go upstairs! Now!" I didn't wait for him to argue. I grabbed his arm and practically dragged him off the couch. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard the sound that haunts me to this day. The kitchen doorknob was rattling. It was a violent metal-on-metal sound. Clack, 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 clack. He was trying to force the deadbolt. "Mason, you're hurting me!" Toby whined, starting to cry. "Quiet!" I hissed, pushing him up the stairs. "Run to Mom and Dad's room and lock the door." I was right behind him. Halfway up the stairs, the rattling stopped. For a second, there was silence. Then, a heavy thud shook the house. He had thrown his body weight against the back door. Thud. Little pigs, a voice shouted from outside. It was muffled, but it sounded mocking, almost like a cartoon character voice, which made it infinitely more terrifying. We scrambled into my parents' master bedroom. I slammed the door, locked it, and pushed my dad's heavy dresser in front of it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wood. "Get in the closet," I told Toby. He dove into the walk-in closet, burying himself behind my mom's long coats. I grabbed the landline phone from the nightstand. No dial tone. The line was dead. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I remembered I had my cell phone in my pocket, a brick of a Nokia back then. I pulled it out. 1 bar of service. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? "Someone is breaking into my house," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm at 422 Cedar Ridge Drive. I'm with my little brother. Please hurry." "Are you in a safe place?" the dispatcher asked calmly. "We're in the master bedroom. We blocked the door." Crash! The sound of shattering glass came from downstairs. It was the kitchen window, the one I had just been looking through. He was inside. "He just broke the window," I choked out, tears hot in my eyes. "He's inside the house." "Officers are on their way, Mason. Stay on the line with me. Don't make a sound." I huddled in the closet with Toby, pulling the sliding doors shut until there was only a tiny crack left. We sat in the dark, smelling the mothballs of my mom's coats and the sour scent of our own fear. Then came the footsteps. They weren't hurried. They were slow, deliberate steps. Creak, creak, creak. He wasn't running to find us. He was exploring. I heard him pause in the living room. The volume on the TV, which we had left on, suddenly went up. The sounds of SpongeBob SquarePants blasted through the house at max volume, echoing up the stairwell. It was psychological torture. He was making himself at home. Then, the footsteps started up the stairs. Thump, step. Thump, step. He was taking his time. He was enjoying this. I hugged Toby so tight I thought I might crush him. I covered his mouth with my hand to muffle his sobbing. The footsteps reached the landing. They moved down the hallway. I held my breath, praying, begging God that he would check my room or the bathroom first. But he didn't. The footsteps stopped right outside the master bedroom door. The doorknob jiggled. Locked. Then, a soft knock. Rap, rap, rap. "I know you're in there, Mason," the voice said. It was right on the other side of the wood. "I just want to play. Don't you want to see a magic trick?" I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. He threw his weight against the door. The dresser scraped an inch across the floorboards. Toby whimpered. "Open up!" The voice lost its playfulness. It dropped an octave, becoming a guttural growl. "Open up!" He slammed against it again. The wood of the doorframe splintered. One more hit, and he would be in. Suddenly, blue and red lights flashed through the cracks of the bedroom blinds. A siren wailed, cutting through the snowy night, getting louder and louder. The pounding on the door stopped instantly. I heard rapid footsteps running away from the door, then down the hallway. Not towards the stairs, but towards the guest room at the end of the hall, the one that had a window overlooking the garage roof. Seconds later, I heard the front door being kicked in by the police. "Police, make yourself known!" We stayed in that closet for another 10 minutes, until a female officer called out our names from the bedroom door. They never caught him. He had jumped from the second-story guest room window onto the garage roof and then into a snowbank. The police found his footprints leading into the dense woods behind our house, where they eventually disappeared into a creek bed. But that wasn't the scariest part. When the police processed the scene, they found cigarette butts all over the backyard. Not just by the kitchen window, but by the living room window, and even under the tree that faced my bedroom. And in the snow on the roof, right outside my bedroom window, they found a half-empty pack of cigarettes and a lighter. Based on the number of cigarette butts, the police estimated he hadn't just arrived when I smelled the smoke. He had been there for hours. He had been watching us eat pizza. He had been watching me play video games. He had been watching us from the roof while we were unsuspecting inside. To this day, I can't sleep without blackout curtains, and every time I hear a tap on a window, even if it's just a tree branch in the wind, I'm 14 years old again, freezing in a closet, waiting for the door to break. We are often told that there is safety in numbers, that if you go to a party surrounded by dozens of people, nothing truly bad can happen to you because there are witnesses. But that logic assumes that the crowd is on your side. It assumes that the people around you possess a basic moral compass. But what happens when you walk into a place where the moral compass is broken? Where the witnesses aren't there to protect you, but to protect their own? I've lived with a physical disability for most of my adult life, and I've never felt truly helpless. Until the night I found myself deep in the Louisiana Bayou, surrounded by strangers who looked at me like prey. My name is Elena. In 2019, I was 25 years old and living in New Orleans. I had been dating a guy named Mark for about 4 months. Mark was a great guy, kind, a bit impulsive, but very protective. He had a friend from work, a guy named Travis, who invited us to a bonfire party out at his cousin's property in the Bayou, about an hour south of the city. Now, a little context about me. I am an amputee. I lost my right leg below the knee in a car accident when I was 19. By 25, I was very comfortable with my prosthetic. It didn't slow me down much, but standing for long periods could still be exhausting, and I usually walked with a very slight limp if I was tired. We left the city around 8 p.m. As we drove further south, the street lights disappeared, replaced by the towering shadows of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. The air grew heavy and humid, sticking to your skin the moment you rolled down the window. We turned onto a dirt road that seemed to go on forever. It was pitch black, the headlights only illuminating clouds of dust, and the occasional reflection of eyes from the swamp water on either side of the road. "You sure this is the place?" I asked, checking my phone. "No service, of course." "Yeah, Travis dropped a pin before we lost signal," Mark said. "It's just up here." We arrived at a large clearing. There were about 10 pickup trucks parked in a semicircle, their headlights pointing toward a massive bonfire raging in the center. Music was blasting, heavy, distorted country rock, and there were maybe 30 people milling around holding red Solo cups. The vibe was weird from the second we stepped out of the car. You know that record scratch moment in movies where the music stops and everyone looks at the new guy? It felt like that. The conversations didn't stop, but the eyes did. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes scanning us, lingering on my leg, then up to my face. Mark, being the social butterfly, grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the coolers. "Relax, Elle. It's just a party." Travis found us, gave us beers, and introduced us to a few people. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. This wasn't a city party. This was a tight-knit community where everyone had known each other since kindergarten. We were the tourists. After about an hour, my leg started to ache from the uneven, muddy ground. I found the tailgate of an abandoned truck near the fire and sat down to rest, stretching my prosthetic leg out. Mark went off to grab us refills. That's when he came over. A guy, probably in his mid-30s, stumbled out of the darkness. He was wearing muddy work boots and a camouflage hat. He smelled like stale bourbon and unwashed clothes. He didn't introduce himself. He just hopped up onto the tailgate next to me. "You ain't from around here, are you?" he slurred, leaning way too close. "No," I said, inching away. "From the city." He looked down at my leg. He didn't look away politely like most people do. He stared at it. Then, without asking, he reached out and knocked his knuckles against the hard plastic of my shin. Thud. Thud. "Fancy hardware," he sneered. "Does it come off?" I pulled my leg back, my heart rate spiking. "Excuse me?" I said, "Does it come off?" He laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "I bet you're real fun to toss around." My stomach turned. I looked around for Mark, but the fire was roaring, blocking my view of the other side of the clearing. "My boyfriend is coming back in a second," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Boyfriend?" he scoffed. He placed a heavy, calloused hand on my thigh. My real thigh, just above the prosthetic line. "I don't see no boyfriend." I froze. It's a reaction I hate about myself, but in that moment, fear paralyzed me. His hand was hot and sweaty, and he began sliding it upward. "Don't touch me," I said, but it came out as a whisper. He leaned in, his breath reeking of alcohol hot against my ear. "You think you're better than us, city girl? Sitting here like a princess?" His fingers were digging into my skin now. I shoved his chest, but he didn't budge. He was heavy, dense with muscle and fat. "Hey!" I looked up to see Mark sprinting around the fire. He dropped the beers and shoved the guy hard. "Get your hands off her!" The guy stumbled off the tailgate laughing. "Whoa there, hero! We were just getting acquainted." Mark steps between us, his fists clenched. "Touch her again, and I'll put you in the ground." The guy's smile vanished. He let out a sharp whistle. Suddenly, the music stopped. 3 other men emerged from the shadows behind the truck. One of them was massive, at least 6 feet 4 inches, with a thick beard. This was the host, a guy they called Big Bo. "We got a problem here?" Bo asked, his voice deep and vibrating with threat. "Yeah," the creep said, pointing at Mark. "City boy here thinks he can come to my property and threaten me." "He was touching my girlfriend," Mark yelled. Bo looked at me, then at Mark. He didn't care. "Disrespectful," Bo muttered. Without warning, Bo lunged. He tackled Mark to the muddy ground. Mark tried to fight back, landing a punch on Bo's jaw, but the other 2 men jumped in. They held Mark's arms down while Bo got him in a chokehold. Mark's face started turning purple. He was thrashing, gasping for air, his eyes bulging. "Stop! You're killing him!" I screamed. I tried to pull the men off, but one of them shoved me back against the truck. I watched in horror as the light began to fade from Mark's eyes. Bo wasn't letting go. He was squeezing harder, a sick look of determination on his face. He was going to kill him right there in the mud. I looked around. 30 people. 30 people were watching. No one moved. No one called the police. Some were even laughing. I realized then that if I didn't do something, Mark was going to die. I couldn't outmuscle them. I couldn't run for help. But I had one advantage they weren't expecting. I scrambled onto the tailgate of the truck, gaining high ground. Bo was right below me, his back exposed as he crushed the life out of Mark. I locked my prosthetic knee into place, making the leg a rigid, unbending rod of metal and carbon fiber. I stood up on my left leg, balanced for a split second, and then I dropped. I drove the hard composite heel of my prosthetic leg down with all my body weight, directly into the center of Bo's spine, right between his shoulder blades. Crack! The sound was sickening, like a dry branch snapping in a quiet forest. Bo let out a guttural scream and instantly released Mark, collapsing sideways into the mud, clutching his back. "My back! I can't feel my legs!" Bo shrieked. The other 2 men let go of Mark, shocked. "Get up!" I screamed at Mark, adrenaline coursing through me like fire. Mark gasped, coughing violently, but he scrambled to his feet. The crowd was stunned. The music was off. The only sound was Bo screaming in the mud. "Get the car!" I yelled. We sprinted. My leg was throbbing where the socket met my skin, but I didn't care. We dove into Mark's car. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking violently. "They're coming!" I looked back. The men were running toward us now, shouting, throwing beer bottles. One bottle shattered against the rear window just as the engine roared to life. Mark spun the tires, mud spraying everywhere, and we fishtailed out of the clearing, tearing down the dirt road faster than I've ever driven in my life. We didn't stop until we hit the paved highway 20 minutes later. Mark's neck was bruised a deep, angry purple. His voice was raspy. "We have to go to the cops. That guy, he was going to kill me." We drove straight to the nearest sheriff's station in the parish. We walked in, dirty, terrified, and shaking. An older officer with gray hair and a thick mustache was behind the desk. We poured out the story, the assault, the chokehold, the escape. The officer listened, taking notes slowly. When we mentioned the property and the name Bo, the officer stopped writing. He put his pen down. "Bo Landry?" the officer asked. "I think so," Mark rasped. "Big guy. Beard." The officer sighed, leaning back in his chair. He looked at us with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Look, folks, Bo Landry's daddy used to be the judge in this parish. His brother runs the fire department." "So?" I demanded. "He tried to strangle my boyfriend." "And you," the officer pointed his pen at me,
"Assaulted a man with a weapon. You admitted to jumping on his spine. We get a report from the hospital that Bo is paralyzed or injured. That's aggravated battery. Maybe attempted murder." My mouth fell open. "Self-defense! He was killing him!" "That's your word against 30 locals," the officer said coldly. "And I smell alcohol on both of you." The room went silent. The realization hit me harder than the physical fight. There was no help here. We weren't victims to him. We were problems. "If I were you," the officer said, lowering his voice, "I'd get back in that car, drive back to New Orleans, and never come back to this parish. Because if I file this report, I got to arrest everyone. And you two aren't going to fare well in our county jail waiting for trial." We stared at him. The threat was clear. We walked out. We got in the car and drove the hour back to the city in complete silence. Mark's voice didn't recover for a week. We later found out, through Travis, who blocked us shortly after, that Bo had suffered 2 fractured vertebrae but wasn't paralyzed. He was walking again within a few months. We never pressed charges. We knew it was useless. Sometimes, late at night, I rub the spot on my leg where the prosthetic attaches. I think about that sound, that crack. Violence is terrifying, but it's not the scariest part. The scariest part was the look in that officer's eyes. The realization that in the wrong place, with the wrong people, the truth doesn't matter. We stopped going to parties after that, and I made sure Mark took some self-defense classes, because the world is a lot bigger and a lot darker than we like to pretend it is. We like to believe that life is a series of random events, that chaos rules the universe and there is no script. But sometimes the timeline loops back on itself. Sometimes the ghosts of your past don't just haunt your memories, they walk right back into your life in the flesh. And when they do, you realize that the universe isn't just chaotic. It has a very dark, very precise sense of irony. This is the story of my father, the night he died, and the night he came back to life. My name is Julian, and to understand this story, you have to understand the kind of man my father, Elias, was. He wasn't a fighter. He was a piano player, a jazz musician in Detroit. He had hands that were insured for $50,000, which back in the early 90s was a fortune. The year was 1992. It was a brutal winter, the kind where the wind coming off Lake Michigan felt like razor blades against your skin. My parents had just finished a set at a club called the Velvet Lounge on the outskirts of the city. It was late, maybe 2:30 a.m. My mom, Sarah, was pregnant with me at the time. They were walking to their car, an old Buick parked down an alleyway because the main lot was full. My dad always described the silence of that night. The snow absorbs sound, you know? It makes everything feel muffled and distant. They were halfway down the alley when they heard the crunch of boots on dry snow behind them. Dad turned around. Standing there were 2 men. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't need to. In that part of Detroit at that hour, no one was coming to help. One of them, a guy with a distinct jagged scar running through his left eyebrow, stepped forward. He held a switchblade. "Keys in the wallet," the scarred man said. His voice was calm, almost bored. My dad handed over his wallet instantly. He wasn't a hero. He just wanted to get my mom home. But then, the scarred man looked at my mom. He looked at her diamond wedding ring. "The ring, too," he said. My mom struggled. Her fingers were swollen from the pregnancy and the cold. The ring wouldn't budge. The second man, impatient, grabbed her wrist and twisted it violently. She screamed. That's when my dad snapped. He didn't think about his hands. He didn't think about the music. He lunged. He tackled the second man into a pile of trash bags. But he forgot about the scarred man. My dad felt the first punch before he saw it, then the second. Then the cold, burning sensation of steel entering his side.
The scarred man stabbed him. Not once, not twice, 7 times. He left my father bleeding out in the dirty slush, gasping for air, watching the steam of his own breath fade away. The men took the wallet, left the ring, and ran. My mom was screaming for help, her voice echoing off the brick walls. But the alley was empty. My dad says he remembers fading out. He remembers looking at the street lamp buzzing overhead and thinking, so this is it. But then a light. Not a heavenly light, but the blinding, rotating red and blue of a patrol car. A lone officer had turned down the alley on a hunch. He saw my mom waving frantically. The cop jumped out. My dad remembers he was young, maybe a rookie, with a mustache that looked too old for his face. The cop didn't wait for an ambulance. He saw the amount of blood and knew there wasn't time. He threw my dad into the back of his squad car and drove like a maniac to Detroit Receiving Hospital. My dad flatlined twice on the table, but he survived. His hands were damaged, nerve damage in the left, so he never played the piano professionally again. But he was alive, and he was a father. The police caught the guys a week later. The scarred man's name was Verdict. Leon Vance. He was a career criminal. He went to prison for attempted murder. 15 years. Fast forward, it's 2010. I'm 18 years old. My dad is now working as a night manager at a 24-hour diner in Chicago. We had moved states to get away from the memories. One Tuesday night, around 3 a.m., the diner is empty except for a trucker in the corner and my dad behind the counter counting the till. The bell above the door jingles. A man walks in. He looks rough, worn down by life. He's wearing a thick army jacket and shaking off the rain. He sits at the counter and orders a black coffee and a slice of cherry pie. My dad pours the coffee. He puts the pie down. The man looks up to say thanks, and my dad freezes. The man has aged. His hair is gray. His face is lined with deep wrinkles. But through the left eyebrow, there is a jagged white scar. It was him, Leon Vance, the man who had stabbed him 7 times and left him to die in the snow 18 years ago. My dad's heart started hammering against his ribs. He said the room started to spin. Does he know? Does he recognize me? Vance didn't look at my dad with any recognition. To Vance, my dad was just another faceless victim in a lifetime of crime. To my dad, Vance was the monster who stole his music. My dad went into the kitchen. He gripped the handle of a chef's knife. He told me later that for about 30 seconds he considered it. He considered walking out there and ending it. An eye for an eye. But he didn't. He looked at a picture of me and my mom taped to the register. He put the knife down. Instead, he picked up the phone and dialed the police. He told them there was a man in his diner who had an outstanding warrant, a bluff, but he hoped it would work. While he was on the phone, Vance finished his pie. He stood up, threw a crumpled $5 bill on the counter, and walked out. My dad watched him go. He felt helpless. The police said they couldn't do anything if he wasn't currently committing a crime. But here is where the story gets weird. Vance walked out of the diner and started crossing the street. It was raining hard, a torrential downpour that blurred the streetlights. A black SUV, speeding way over the limit, hydroplaned. My dad watched through the plate glass window. It happened in slow motion. The SUV spun out of control, jumped the curb, and slammed directly into Leon Vance. The impact threw him 20 feet into a concrete divider. My dad ran outside. Not to save him, but just to witness it. He stood over the man who had tried to kill him. Vance was twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pooling in the rain, mixing with the gutter water, exactly the way my dad's blood had mixed with the snow in 1992. Vance looked up at my dad. His eyes focused for a second. And in that last moment, my dad swears he saw a flash of recognition, a realization. And then the light went out of his eyes. The man who tried to kill my father died at his feet 18 years later, almost to the day. But that's not the end. 2 years ago, my dad had a stroke. He ended up in an assisted living facility back in Michigan, closer to where I was working. He was in a wheelchair, his memory starting to fade a little, but he still loved to tell stories. One afternoon, I was visiting him in the common room. He was sitting with another resident, a guy named Frank. Frank was new, a retired guy who mostly kept to himself. They were watching the news, and a story came on about a police chase in Detroit. "Detroit," Frank grumbled. "City chewed me up and spit me out." My dad laughed. "Tell me about it. I almost died in a pile of trash bags in Detroit back in '92. Frank froze. He slowly turned his wheelchair to face my dad. 1992? "Yeah," my dad said. "Winter." Outside the Velvet Lounge. Frank's face went pale. His hands, shaking a little from Parkinson's, gripped the armrests of his chair. "A stabbing? 7 times?" My dad stopped smiling. "How did you know that?" Frank's eyes watered. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an old, laminated prayer card. It was worn around the edges. "I was a patrolman," Frank whispered. "My first year on the force. I found a guy, a musician, bleeding out in the snow. I drove him to receiving in my squad car because the ambulance was too far out. I ruined the upholstery." Frank looked at my dad, his voice trembling. "I never knew if you made it. I called the hospital the next day, but they said you were transferred. I thought you died." My dad stared at him. Tears started streaming down his face. Here was the man who had saved his life 30 years ago, the rookie cop with a mustache. They had both lived entire lives, moved cities, raised families, and somehow, by complete accident, ended up in the same nursing home, watching the same TV, in the same room. They held hands and cried for an hour. Frank passed away 3 months later in his sleep. My dad spoke at his funeral. "I don't know if I believe in destiny. I don't know if there's a grand plan. But the odds of my father surviving that night, the odds of his attacker dying in front of him years later, and the odds of him spending his final days with the very man who gave him a second chance. It makes you wonder, are we really in control of our lives? Or are we just characters in a story that's already been written?" We often think of predators as monsters lurking in the shadows, masked figures in alleyways, or faceless threats on the dark web. But the most dangerous predators are the ones who hide in plain sight. They don't use fear to get to you. They use kindness. They identify the cracks in your armor, your loneliness, your grief, your desire to be understood, and they slip through them like water. I learned this the hard way. I invited a monster into my life, not because I was stupid, but because I was human. And by the time I saw the teeth behind the smile, he was already standing in my living room. My name is Sarah. This happened in the winter of 2018, when I was 26 years old and living in Chicago.
To understand why I let this happen, you have to understand my headspace at the time.
I had just moved to the city after a devastating breakup that ended a 5-year relationship. I was lonely, I was clinically depressed, and I was desperate for a distraction. I poured all my energy into my one passion, writing. I started spending my evenings at a small community library in the Andersonville neighborhood. It was a cozy, safe place with worn velvet armchairs and the smell of old paper. It felt like a sanctuary. I first noticed Silas in early November. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a grandfather. He was probably in his late 60s, always dressed in a tweed jacket and a flat cap. He would sit at the corner table with a stack of leather-bound notebooks, scribbling furiously with a fountain pen. One night, I was struggling with a chapter on my laptop, visibly frustrated. I felt a tap on my shoulder. Writer's block is a cruel mistress, isn't she? I turned around. It was Silas. He had a kind, crinkled smile and eyes that seemed incredibly empathetic.
"Is it that obvious?" I laughed nervously. "I've been watching you work for weeks," he said softly. "You have the discipline. Most young people just stare at their phones. You have the fire." That was the hook. He validated me. We started talking. He told me he was a retired literature professor from Northwestern University. He said his wife had passed away a few years ago and that coming to the library was his way of staying connected to the world of ideas. He was charming, articulate, and seemingly harmless. Over the next few weeks, library friends turned into coffee. We would meet at a cafe down the street. I let my guard down completely. I told him about the breakup,
About my depression, about my fears of failing as a writer. He listened with an intensity that felt flattering at the time, but looking back, it makes my skin crawl. He wasn't listening to understand me. He was mining for data. He was learning exactly which buttons to push. He started bringing me gifts, small things at first, a vintage pen, a rare book of poetry. Then it got weird. One Tuesday, he slid a small velvet box across the table. Inside was a gold locket.
"It belonged to my daughter," he said, his eyes tearing up. "She died when she was your age. You remind me so much of her. I want you to have it."
I felt a pit in my stomach. This was too much. It felt intimate and heavy. But how do you say no to a grieving old man? I took it, guilt gnawing at me.
"Thank you, Silas," I whispered. "You're my muse, Sarah," he said,
reaching out and covering my hand with his. His skin was dry and papery, but his grip was surprisingly strong.
"You're the only bright spot in an old man's life."
That night, the emails started. He had asked for my email to critique my work, but at 2 a.m., I received a message. Subject: thinking of you. Body:
"I can't sleep. The apartment is so quiet without you. I know we only met for coffee, but I feel like our souls have known each other for centuries. You are too good for this world, Sarah. I want to protect you." I read it twice. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Protect me? From what? I didn't reply. The next day, he sent 5 more. They ranged from apologies for being too intense to angry rants about how I was ignoring him, then back to poetry. I decided to distance myself. I stopped going to the library. I ignored his calls. He had my number because I needed to verify a writing contest he told me about. Another lie, I now realize. 3 days of silence passed. I thought maybe he got the hint. Then came the Saturday of the blizzard. It was one of those Chicago storms where the wind howls off the lake and rattles the window panes. I was in my 3rd-floor apartment, wrapped in a blanket, watching a movie. My roommate, Jenna, was out of town for the weekend, so I was alone. Around 9:30 p.m., my buzzer rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the intercom. "Who is it?" "Delivery," a muffled voice said. I hadn't ordered food, but sometimes neighbors buzzed the wrong apartment. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, it rang again. Long, sustained buzzes. Bzzz, bzzz. I looked out my front window. Parked across the street, under the orange glow of a street lamp, was a beige sedan. It was covered in snow, meaning it had been sitting there for a while. Standing next to it, staring up at my specific window, was a figure in a tweed jacket and a flat cap. It was Silas. My heart stopped. My apartment was 4 miles from the library. I had never told him where I lived. Never. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I had a text from an unknown number. "I see your light is on, Sarah. I know you're home. Why are you hiding from me? I just want to talk. I brought you soup." I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. I double-checked the deadbolt. Then the knocking started. Not on the downstairs main door, but on my apartment door. He had gotten into the building. Someone must have let him in,
Or he had slipped in behind a tenant. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, rhythmic, almost polite.
"Sarah?" His voice was right on the other side of the wood. "I know you're in there, Muse. Open up. It's cold outside." I retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, and dialed 911. "911, what is your emergency?" "There is a man outside my apartment door," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "He's stalking me. His name is Silas. I don't know his last name. Please, help." "Sarah, open the door," Silas said. His voice changed. The grandfatherly warmth was gone. It was cold, flat, and commanding. "You're being a brat. After everything I did for you, I gave you my daughter's locket." Slam. He kicked the door. The frame rattled. "Open the door!" he screamed. I heard the sound of metal scratching against the lock.
He was trying to pick it or jam it.
"He's trying to break in," I told the dispatcher, huddled in the bathtub, clutching the knife. "Please, he's going to kill me." "Officers are 2 minutes away," the operator said. Then silence. The scratching stopped. The yelling stopped. For a terrifying minute, the only sound was the wind howling outside. I thought maybe he had left. Maybe he heard me on the phone. Then I heard a sound that I will never forget as long as I live. Scritch, scritch. It was coming from the bathroom window, the window that led to the fire escape. I looked up. Behind the frosted glass, a shadow loomed. A hand pressed against the pane. He had gone up the fire escape. He knew exactly where I was hiding. The window started to slide up. I had forgotten to lock the window latch. I screamed.
I didn't have a choice. I lunged at the window and slammed it down with all my weight, just as his fingers curled under the sash. He howled in pain, but didn't let go. We were locked in a struggle, me pushing down, him pushing up. Through the glass, I saw his face. It was twisted in a rictus of pure rage. He didn't look like a professor. He looked like a demon. "You ungrateful little bitch," he spat, his face pressed against the glass. Suddenly, sirens wailed from the street below. Blue and red lights flashed against the snow, illuminating his face in a strobe light of horror. Silas looked down. He let go of the window and scrambled back up the fire escape toward the roof. The police found him hiding behind a chimney, shivering and frostbitten. They arrested him. But the real horror came later at the station.
I gave my statement. The detective, a woman named Miller, looked at me with pity. "You're lucky, Sarah," she said. "His name isn't Silas." His name was Arthur Vane. He wasn't a retired professor. He was a disbarred lawyer who had spent 15 years in prison for kidnapping. And the daughter whose locket he gave me? She never existed. The locket was cheap jewelry he bought at a pawn shop. But here is the detail that keeps me up at night. The police searched his car, the beige sedan parked outside. In the trunk, they found a roll of duct tape, a set of surgical zip ties, and a notebook. It was one of the leather notebooks I used to watch him write in at the library. The police let me see one page. It was a timeline. November 4th, target acquired, library. November 12th, contact made. She is weak, lonely. November 20th, coffee. She trusts me. December 5th, the locket. She accepted the collar. He didn't see me as a person. He didn't even see me as a muse. To him, I was a project, a timeline, a target. Arthur Vane is back in prison now, violating his parole. I moved out of Chicago a month later. I live in a small town now, and I don't go to libraries anymore. I still write, but I never show anyone my work. And every time an older man smiles at me in a coffee shop, every time someone tries to offer me unsolicited advice or kindness, I don't feel warmth. I feel the cold wind of a blizzard, and I see a hand pressing against the frosted glass, trying to get in.